The message arrived at exactly midnight on a cold January evening. Every television screen on Earth went dark for 3 seconds before the alien face appeared. The creature had gray skin, 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern, and a mouth that seemed too wide for its narrow face. It spoke in a voice that sounded like grinding metal, but somehow the words came through in every language spoken on the planet. Admiral Cole was in her office at the United Nations Defense Command when the transmission began. She had spent 30 years in the Navy and had seen many strange things in her career, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. She watched the screen with steady eyes as the alien introduced itself as commander of the Dominion. The message was simple and terrifying. The Dominion was a coalition of 3 spacefaring species that had conquered over 200 worlds in the past 1,000 years. They had watched Earth from afar and had decided that humanity would be their next addition. The terms were clear. Humanity had 72 hours to surrender all planetary resources and submit to permanent servitude. Refusal would result in total annihilation. Commander ended the transmission with what he probably thought was a generous offer. He said that humans who cooperated would be allowed to live as workers in mining colonies. Those who resisted would be eliminated. He made it sound like he was doing humanity a favor. The world erupted into chaos. People flooded the streets in every major city. Some were screaming in terror. Others were praying. A few were already fighting each other over supplies. Governments held emergency sessions that lasted through the night. Military leaders from every nation gathered in secure bunkers to discuss options that seemed increasingly hopeless. Admiral Cole did not panic. She called her team together within the hour. Lieutenant Daniel Perry arrived first. He was young but brilliant, a tactical officer who had graduated at the top of his class from West Point. Captain Maria Santos came next. She was an intelligence specialist who had spent 15 years studying signals from space. She had always believed that humanity was not alone. Now she wished she had been wrong. The 3 of them studied the transmission for hours. They analyzed every frame, every word, every flicker of light behind the alien commander. Captain Santos discovered something interesting in the background of the video. There were screens showing data about Earth. They had been watching humanity for a long time. They knew about human cities, human population centers, and human technology. But Lieutenant Perry noticed something else. The data on those screens was incomplete. They knew where humans lived and what tools they used. They did not seem to know much about human history. There was no mention of the world wars, the revolutions, the countless conflicts that had shaped the species. They saw humanity as just another primitive civilization waiting to be conquered. Admiral Cole made her decision before dawn. She contacted every military leader on the planet through secure channels. She told them that surrender was not an option. They had made one thing very clear. They wanted slaves, not partners. A species that submitted would spend eternity serving alien masters. A species that fought might die, but at least they would die free. The response surprised even her. Every nation agreed to stand together. Old enemies put aside their differences. Countries that had been threatening each other with nuclear weapons just weeks ago now promised to aim those weapons at the stars instead. For the first time in human history, Earth was truly united. The fleet entered the solar system on the second day. Their ships were massive, each one larger than any aircraft carrier ever built. They moved past Mars without slowing down. They passed the Moon without a second glance. They positioned themselves in orbit around Earth like predators circling wounded prey. Commander was pleased with what his scanners showed him. Human technology was even more primitive than he had expected. Their fastest ships could barely escape their own gravity well. Their weapons were based on simple chemical explosions. Their communication systems were laughably easy to intercept. He had conquered species with far more advanced tools than this. He sent his report to the Dominion Council with confidence. He predicted that the conquest would take no more than 3 days. Human resistance would collapse within hours of the first assault. He had done this many times before. He knew how conquered species behaved. They always started with brave words and empty threats. Then they saw the true power of the war machine. Then they begged for mercy. What did not understand was that his scanners could not measure what made humanity dangerous. They could count human ships and catalog human weapons. They could not count human courage. They could not catalog human stubbornness. They had no way to measure the millions of years of evolution that had turned a species of hairless apes into the dominant life form on a planet that seemed determined to kill them. Earth was not a gentle world. Humans had survived ice ages that lasted thousands of years. They had survived plagues that killed half their population. They had survived floods and fires and famines. They had survived each other. Every human alive was the descendant of survivors. Giving up was not in their nature. Admiral Cole broadcast her response to the ultimatum at exactly the 72-hour deadline. She stood in front of cameras with her uniform pressed and her eyes clear. She spoke directly to Commander, knowing that he was listening. She told him that humanity had received his generous offer and had given it serious consideration. She told him that representatives from every nation on Earth had discussed the terms. She told him that after careful deliberation, the people of Earth had reached a unanimous decision. The answer was no. She did not threaten. She did not boast. She simply stated the facts. Humanity would not surrender. Humanity would not submit. Humanity would fight with everything they had, and if they lost, they would make sure they remembered the cost of victory for 1,000 years. Commander watched the transmission with growing confusion. He had delivered ultimatums to dozens of species. Some had cried. Some had pleaded. Some had tried to bargain. None had ever simply said no. He did not know how to respond to a species that refused to acknowledge the obvious reality of their situation. He gave the order to begin the invasion. His ships descended toward the blue planet below. He expected the usual pattern: brief resistance, followed by panic, followed by surrender. He expected this world to fall like all the others. He was wrong. The first ships entered Earth's atmosphere over the Pacific Ocean just after sunrise. They came in formation, 50 vessels arranged in a perfect triangle. Their shields glowed with a faint blue light as they pushed through the upper atmosphere. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never known defeat. Captain Brooks was waiting for them. He led a squadron of 40 fighter jets that had been modified overnight with every experimental weapon the military had ever developed. The planes were old compared to the alien ships. They were slow and fragile and in every possible way. But they were flown by pilots who had trained their entire lives for combat, and they were defending their home. Brooks gave the order to engage at exactly 6 in the morning. His squadron rose from hidden positions on aircraft carriers scattered across the Pacific. They climbed toward the alien formation with engines screaming. They detected them immediately and responded with weapons fire that turned the sky orange with explosions. 3 planes were destroyed in the first 10 seconds, 5 more in the next 20. The alien weapons were precise and devastating. They tracked human aircraft with perfect accuracy and burned them out of the sky like insects flying too close to a flame. Captain Brooks watched his friends die and kept flying forward. Lieutenant Amy Dawson was on his wing. She was 26 years old and had dreamed of being a pilot since she was a child. She had never imagined that her first real combat mission would be against creatures from another world. But she did not hesitate. She pushed her plane to its maximum speed and aimed for the nearest vessel. Something strange happened as she approached. The alien ship was descending rapidly, its shields flickering as it pushed through the thickening atmosphere. Dawson noticed that the blue glow around the ship was not steady. It pulsed every few seconds, growing brighter and then dimming. She realized what she was seeing. The shields were struggling to handle the heat and pressure of atmospheric entry. She radioed her discovery to the fleet before a weapon found her plane. Her last words were coordinates and timing data. She told them exactly when and where the shields were weakest. Then her transmission cut off and her plane became a ball of fire falling toward the ocean below. Her sacrifice gave humanity its first victory. Captain Brooks relayed the information to every pilot in the sky. They stopped trying to destroy the alien ships with direct attacks. Instead, they harassed them during descent, forcing them to adjust their angles and speeds. The changes disrupted the careful balance of their shield systems. 7 vessels lost shield integrity and were torn apart by atmospheric friction. 12 more suffered damage that forced them to retreat to orbit. Commander watched from his command ship with growing disbelief. He had lost 47 vessels in the first engagement. That was more than he had lost in his last 3 planetary conquests combined. The humans were supposed to be primitive. They were supposed to be easy. Instead, they were fighting with a ferocity he had never encountered. The ground invasion began 3 hours later. Troops landed simultaneously in North America, Europe, and Asia. They expected to face disorganized resistance from terrified civilians. They found something very different. Sergeant Palmer was stationed outside Chicago when the first alien soldiers touched down. He was a veteran of 2 foreign wars and had spent 20 years learning how to fight and survive in impossible conditions. He gathered his unit and disappeared into the urban landscape before they could establish a perimeter. The aliens searched for them with advanced scanners that could detect body heat through solid walls, but Palmer knew his city. He knew which buildings had thick enough walls to block the scanners. He knew which underground tunnels connected to which basements. He knew how to move through shadows like a ghost. His unit struck at night. They attacked supply convoys and communication posts. They killed soldiers in their sleep and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. They painted messages on walls in alien blood. The messages all said the same thing: welcome to Earth. Across the planet, similar stories were unfolding. In Paris, a retired schoolteacher organized a resistance cell that destroyed 3 vehicles with homemade explosives. In Tokyo, factory workers converted their assembly lines to produce weapons instead of cars. In Sydney, fishermen used their boats to transport fighters between coastal cities while avoiding alien patrols. They had expected submission. They had expected fear. They did not understand what they were seeing. On every world they had conquered, the population had broken within days of invasion. Leaders had surrendered. Civilians had fled. Resistance had crumbled like sand castles in the tide. Humanity did not break. When one leader fell, another took their place. When one resistance cell was discovered, 2 more emerged to replace it. When civilians were given the choice between cooperation and death, they chose death with a frequency that baffled commanders. Admiral Cole coordinated the global defense from a hidden bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains. She had not slept in 3 days. Neither had anyone on her staff. They worked in shifts that never really ended, drinking cold coffee and eating food they barely tasted. Every hour brought new reports of victories and losses, of heroes and martyrs, of a species fighting for its survival. She received a message from Commander on the 4th day of the invasion. He demanded to know why humanity continued to resist. His troops controlled major cities on every continent. His ships dominated the skies. By every measure of warfare he understood, the war was already won. Admiral Cole sent back a single sentence. She told him that he clearly did not understand warfare at all. They had conquered 200 worlds. They had never fought a species like this. They had never faced an enemy that refused to acknowledge defeat. They were beginning to realize that this invasion would cost them far more than they had ever imagined. And they were right to be afraid. 3 weeks had passed since the invasion began. They controlled the skies in most major cities. Their flag flew over government buildings on every continent. By their own standards, the conquest was complete. By human standards, the war had just begun. Sergeant Palmer led his guerrilla unit through the ruins of Chicago at midnight. The city he had known his entire life was barely recognizable. Alien patrol vehicles floated through empty streets. Strange lights flickered in windows where families used to live. The sound of human laughter had been replaced by the grinding hum of machinery. But the city was not dead. It was hiding. Palmer knew where to find the people who had refused to evacuate. They lived in basements and subway tunnels and forgotten maintenance corridors. They came out at night to gather supplies and share information. They were not soldiers. They were teachers and construction workers and store clerks, but they had learned to fight. His unit struck a supply depot just before dawn. They killed 7 alien guards and destroyed enough equipment to supply a battalion for a month. Then they disappeared into the underground before the response teams could arrive. They left behind a message spray-painted on the wall. The words were simple: "We are still here." Across the planet, similar messages were appearing everywhere. They could not understand how the resistance continued to operate. They had captured or killed thousands of human fighters. They had destroyed dozens of hidden bases. Every time they thought they had crushed the rebellion, it emerged somewhere else, stronger than before. Commander received reports from his occupation commanders that disturbed him deeply. Human prisoners did not behave like prisoners from other conquered species. When interrogated, they refused to provide information even under extreme pressure. They did not beg for mercy or offer to cooperate in exchange for better treatment. They simply endured until their bodies gave out. One officer reported that a captured human had laughed at him during questioning. The human had told him that killing one resistance fighter created 10 more. He had told him that every atrocity they committed was broadcast across the planet, turning neutral civilians into active enemies. He had told him that humanity had been fighting itself for thousands of years, and had gotten very good at it. The officer had killed the prisoner in frustration, but the words haunted him. He began to wonder if his species had made a terrible mistake. Doctor worked in an underground laboratory beneath Denver. She had been a physics professor before the invasion. Now she led a team of scientists who were racing to develop weapons that could actually hurt the. They worked 18-hour days in cramped conditions with equipment salvaged from destroyed alien vessels. Her breakthrough came on the 19th day of the occupation. Using fragments of shield generators and principles of electromagnetic interference, her team created a device that could penetrate alien shields at close range. The weapon was crude and dangerous. It required someone to get within 50 meters of a target to use it. The energy discharge would probably kill the user as well as the target. She announced the invention to Admiral Cole, expecting hesitation. Instead, she received a request for 5,000 units as quickly as possible. Volunteers to carry them were already lining up. The first field test happened outside Los Angeles 3 days later. A young man named Carlos carried the device into a command post during a coordinated attack. He walked through enemy fire with the calm determination of someone who had already accepted his death. He reached the command post and activated the weapon. The explosion destroyed the building and everything inside it, but it also killed 47 officers, including a regional commander. It was the single most devastating attack humanity had launched since the invasion began. Admiral Cole authorized deployment of the weapons across all resistance networks. She knew what she was asking. She was asking people to die. But she also knew that humanity could not win this war through conventional means. They needed to make the pay for every inch of ground in blood. The casualties on both sides began to mount rapidly. Soldiers started showing signs of psychological stress that their commanders had never seen before. They were accustomed to quick conquests against enemies who surrendered once defeat became obvious. They were not prepared for an enemy that kept fighting even when victory was impossible. An intelligence officer compiled a report on human psychology that circulated among the occupation forces. He tried to explain the concept of sacrifice to his fellow soldiers. He described how humans would throw themselves onto explosive devices to save their companions. He described how parents would die to protect their children. He described how strangers would risk everything to help people they had never met. The language did not have words for these behaviors. They called it defective self-preservation instinct. They did not understand that humans called it love. Admiral Cole received a communication from Commander on the 21st day. He offered new terms. If humanity surrendered immediately, he would reduce the labor quotas for the surviving population. He would allow humans to maintain some of their cultural practices. He would even permit families to stay together in the work camps. He seemed to think these were generous concessions. He did not understand that his offer made humanity angrier than his original ultimatum. He was not offering freedom. He was offering a more comfortable cage. Admiral Cole did not bother responding. She was too busy planning the counteroffensive that would change the course of the war. They had brought overwhelming force to Earth. They had superior technology in greater numbers. They had centuries of experience conquering worlds, but they had never faced an enemy with nothing left to lose. They had never fought a species that would burn their own cities rather than surrender them. They had never encountered the thing that humans called the unbreakable spirit. They were about to learn what it meant. 2 months into the war and the situation had reached a deadly balance. They controlled the skis and the cities. Humanity controlled the shadows and the spirit of resistance. Neither side could deliver a killing blow, but Admiral Cole knew that time favored the invaders. Every day that passed, more humans died. Every week, more resources were depleted. If something did not change soon, humanity would slowly bleed to death. She gathered her senior officers in the bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains. The room was cramped and smelled of recycled air. Maps covered every wall, marked with red symbols showing positions and blue symbols showing resistance cells. There was far more red than blue. Admiral Cole presented Operation Homecoming. It was the most desperate plan anyone had ever proposed. The goal was simple: capture a command vessel. The method was suicide. Commander Jake volunteered to lead the mission before anyone else could speak. He was 53 years old and had served in the Navy for 30 years. He had a wife and 2 daughters who were hiding somewhere in the mountains of Montana. He had not seen them since the invasion began. He knew he probably never would again. 500 volunteers joined him. They came from every branch of the military and every corner of the planet. There were soldiers and sailors and pilots. There were engineers and medics and communication specialists. They trained for 2 weeks in an abandoned mine shaft, practicing maneuvers they had invented because no one had ever tried anything like this before. The launch happened at midnight on a cloudless night. Submarines surfaced in the Pacific Ocean and fired modified missiles into the sky. The missiles were not carrying explosives. They were carrying people. Each missile contained 10 soldiers strapped into crude capsules designed to survive the journey into low orbit. The ride was violent and terrifying. 3 missiles failed during ascent, killing everyone aboard. 2 more were destroyed by defensive fire. But 37 missiles reached orbit, and their passengers survived to transfer into stolen shuttles that Resistance fighters had captured weeks earlier. Commander led the assault on the Dominion flagship personally. His shuttle crashed through a cargo bay door and skidded across the deck in a shower of sparks. He was out of his seat and firing before the shuttle stopped moving. His soldiers followed him into the darkness of the alien ship. The fighting was brutal and close. Crew members were not trained for hand-to-hand combat. They relied on their technological superiority to keep enemies at a distance, but there was no distance here. Humans and aliens fought in narrow corridors and cramped compartments. They struggled over weapons and died in each other's arms. 400 humans died in the first hour, but the survivors kept pushing forward. They had memorized the layout of command ships from intelligence gathered by Resistance spies. They knew exactly where they needed to go. Reached the communications array with 17 soldiers still alive. They killed the guards and sealed the doors. Then they broadcast a message to the galaxy on every frequency they used. The message was simple. It identified Earth and its location. It announced that humanity was fighting the Dominion and winning. It invited any species that had suffered under rule to join them, and it ended with a promise: "Come for us if you dare." The transmission lasted 4 minutes before forces cut the power. By then, the message had traveled further than any human voice had ever reached. Civilizations across the galaxy heard it. Species that had hidden from the Dominion for centuries heard it, and they began to pay attention to the small blue planet that had dared to fight back. On the ground, the captured flagship became a symbol of hope. News of its fall spread through Resistance networks within hours. People who had been hiding emerged to join the fight. Factories that had been producing weapons in secret doubled their output. The tide was beginning to turn. Doctor shield-piercing weapons were deployed globally. Resistance cells used them to destroy vehicles and command posts. Occupation forces that had felt invincible suddenly found themselves vulnerable. Soldiers who had walked openly through human cities began traveling in armored convoys. Officers who had treated humans with contempt began watching them with fear. Commander observed these developments with growing alarm. He had lost more troops on Earth than the Dominion had lost in the past 50 years of conquest combined. His supply lines were under constant attack. His soldiers were exhausted and demoralized. The easy victory he had promised was turning into a nightmare. He sent an urgent request to the Dominion Council. He needed reinforcements. He needed new weapons. He needed help crushing this impossible species before they inspired other conquered worlds to rebel. The Council's response arrived 3 days later. It was not what he expected. No reinforcements would be sent. The Council had reviewed the casualty reports and concluded that Earth was not worth the cost. They recommended that negotiate a withdrawal and leave this world to its violent inhabitants. Read the message with trembling hands. He had served the Dominion his entire life. He had conquered 12 worlds and never tasted defeat. He would not accept defeat now. He would not be remembered as the commander who retreated from primitives. He gave the order that would define the rest of the war. If he could not have Earth, no one would. His remaining ships would begin orbital bombardment. They would burn every city, every forest, every field. They would reduce the planet to ash and glass. Humanity would be erased from existence. His officers received the command with mixed reactions. Some obeyed without question. Others hesitated. They had seen what humans were capable of. They wondered if even extinction would stop them. Admiral Cole learned of the bombardment order within the hour. She had anticipated this possibility. She had prepared for it, but knowing what was coming did not make it easier to face. She had one chance to save her species, one desperate gamble that would either end the war or end everything. She gave the order to begin the final phase. The final phase began with a lie. Commander broadcast a surrender message from the captured flagship. He told Commander that humanity had recognized the futility of resistance. He told him that Admiral Cole was dead and the remaining military leadership had voted to accept terms. He requested a meeting to discuss the details of submission. Was suspicious but intrigued. A surrender would be cleaner than bombardment. It would preserve his reputation with the Dominion Council. He agreed to delay the attack for 12 hours while negotiations proceeded. Those 12 hours changed everything. Captain Maria Santos led a covert team towards personal command vessel while the rest of humanity held its breath. She had volunteered for this mission knowing that she would probably not survive, but she also knew that survival had stopped being the point. The point was making sure humanity had a future, even if she was not there to see it. Her team used stolen codes and captured equipment to slip past security. They moved through maintenance tunnels and ventilation shafts, crawling through spaces that were never designed for human bodies. 2 of her soldiers died from injuries along the way. The others kept moving. Santos reached the command chamber alone. Her uniform was torn and bloody. Her weapon was empty. She walked through the doors with her hands visible and her head held high. Commander was waiting for her. He sat in a chair that looked like a throne, surrounded by guards who pointed weapons at her heart. He was larger than she had expected. His gray skin stretched over a frame that towered above her. His 4 eyes studied her with cold curiosity. He asked why she had come. He expected her to beg. He expected her to plead for mercy on behalf of her species. He had seen this before. Conquered races always sent representatives to cry and bargain when defeat became certain. Santos did not beg. She told him she had come to deliver a message. She told him that the surrender broadcast was false. She told him that while he had been waiting for negotiations, human forces had been implementing their final contingency plan. Then she told him the truth about humanity. She spoke of human history, not the weapons and the wars, but what lay beneath them. She spoke of a species that had clawed its way up from nothing, a species that had faced extinction dozens of times and refused to accept it, a species that had fought ice ages and plagues and predators and each other, a species that had conquered their own planet through sheer stubborn refusal to die. She told him about the world wars that had killed millions and how humanity had rebuilt. She told him about the pandemics that had killed more and how humanity had survived. She told him about natural disasters and nuclear threats and environmental collapse. Every generation had faced challenges that seemed impossible. Every generation had found a way through. Listened with growing unease. He had studied human military capabilities. He had not studied human resilience. He had seen what humanity could do with weapons. He had not understood what humanity could do with will. Santos showed him the real threat. She pulled a data device from her pocket and projected images onto the chamber walls. The images showed nuclear arsenals around the world. Thousands of warheads aimed not at the fleet, but at the Earth itself. She explained what the images meant. Every nation with nuclear weapons had agreed to the same plan. If orbital bombardment began, humanity would detonate every nuclear device simultaneously. The planet would be rendered uninhabitable for centuries. Every human would die, but so would every soldier on the surface, and the radiation would damage or destroy most of the fleet in orbit. Stared at the projections with something that looked like horror. He had conquered species that would sacrifice soldiers to protect their leaders. He had conquered species that would sacrifice cities to protect their nations. He had never encountered a species that would sacrifice their entire world to deny an enemy victory. Santos spoke the words that would echo across the galaxy for generations. She told him that he could not conquer a species willing to burn their own planet rather than submit. She told him that humans would rather end their entire civilization than spend a single generation as slaves. She told him that this was not a bluff. This was not a negotiation. This was a promise. Sat in silence for a long moment. His guards waited for orders. His fleet waited in orbit. The entire war waited on his decision. He finally spoke. He asked Santos what humanity wanted. Santos answered without hesitation. She wanted them to leave. She wanted them to mark Earth as forbidden territory. She wanted them to tell the galaxy that this world was not to be touched. Agreed. The fleet began its withdrawal before sunset. Ships that had dominated Earth's skies for 2 months turned and accelerated toward the edge of the solar system. Ground forces abandoned their positions and retreated to transport vessels. Commander sent one final transmission to the Dominion Council before departing. His message was brief. He reported that Earth was unconquerable. He recommended that the planet be marked as forbidden territory. He warned that any future expedition would face the same result, and he added a personal observation that became legendary among commanders. He said that humans were not prey. He said they were something else entirely. He said they were the kind of species that the Dominion should never have provoked. 1 year later, the first alien diplomatic vessels arrived in Earth's solar system. They came not as conquerors but as petitioners. Word had spread across the galaxy about the species that had defeated the civilizations that had lived in fear for centuries wanted to meet the beings who had shown that resistance was possible. Admiral Cole, now Secretary General of Earth's new Galactic Relations Council, received the first ambassador in a ceremony broadcast to billions of viewers. The alien was from a species that had been enslaved by the for 300 years. They had heard the message that Commander had broadcast from the captured flagship. They had begun their own rebellion, and they had won. The ambassador asked what humanity wanted from the galaxy. What did they hope to gain from contact with other civilizations? What were their ambitions now that they had proven themselves capable of standing against the greatest power in known space? Admiral Cole smiled. Her answer was simple. She said that humanity wanted what they had always wanted. They wanted to survive. They wanted to protect their own. And they wanted to find out what else was out there. The galaxy would never be the same. A small blue planet on the edge of an unremarkable spiral arm had changed everything. Species that had accepted dominion began to question. Rebellion sparked on a dozen worlds. The dominion that had seemed eternal began to crack. And at the center of it all stood humanity, not the strongest species in the galaxy, not the most advanced, but perhaps the most stubborn, perhaps the most determined, perhaps the most dangerous. They had declared war on Earth without understanding what they were facing. They had learned the hard way that some species are not meant to be conquered. They had discovered the true power of humanity. It was not technology or numbers or resources. It was something far more dangerous. It was the absolute refusal to surrender. It was the willingness to pay any price for freedom. It was the unshakable belief that tomorrow could be better than today. It was hope, and it would change the stars forever.